Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Octopus Electric Vehicles live stream, normally called CnC Discuss Octopus EV with George and Tom. George and Tom are specialists in our product called Powerloop, which recently has got an awful lot of attention, both on fully charged and in some form of media in another place, maybe on socials, maybe you've heard about us in other places. Powerloop is what we believe the future of the energy network can be and will look like. It's not quite as far along as it will be, and it's not the future today. It's the iteration of what the future could look like. And we need everybody that can join Powerloop to help us understand what that future might be like. On the call, as I said, are George and Tom. And it'd be really cool for George and Tom. Do you want to just introduce yourselves, tell us what you do and why you do it? More why you do it so much. I have a history in motorsport and in cars. I love everything with batteries and wheels, whereas George and Tom have history in other things that make them much more qualified to speak about Powerloop today. I'll be asking all the questions on my phone here. So if you do see me looking down or looking around, it's because Ollie, our secret squirrel in the background of YouTube Live, will be getting all of your questions to us here. Powerloop HQ, which is a virtual HQ, we'd like to have you note. But without further ado, I'd like to pass over to George first, who will introduce you to himself. And then, George, if you can pass over to Tom, that would be amazing.
Perfect. Thanks, Charlie, and props to Ollie. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for taking the time out to speak to us. My name's George. I'm an electric vehicle specialist at Octopus Electric Vehicles. And what I spend my time doing is helping people through the Powerloop journey. So that's explaining what Powerloop's all about, working out whether or not it's the best solution for people to jump onto. What we'll do over the next hour or so is jump into some of the questions and eligibilities that prevent that from happening. It's definitely not for everyone, but we're sure to be able to offer any kind of electric vehicle solution for those who it's not. One of the reasons why I think Powerloop is such an exciting project to work on is it's really making steps in the democratization of energy, and the idea of being able to, one day buy and sell energy to your neighbors is something that Powerloop is not what it is today, but it's definitely taking the steps towards that. And I think it's a really exciting thing to work on. With me here is Tom. Tom, do you want to give yourself a little introduction?
Absolutely. So like George, I am an electric vehicle specialist here at Octopus Electric Vehicles. And my role is a similar fashion, is to help you as customers get into the Powerloop project and also make sure that you're happy with the project and it will fit with your lifestyle. I think something we really like to stress here at Octopus is we want Powerloop to fit within your life and not you fit your life around Powerloop. If it works, it is a super trial which you can get involved with. If it doesn't seem like the correct option for you, that is not a worry. We do have an option for everyone when it comes to electric vehicles here at Octopus. And that is, again, what we are here for, to help you with that electric journey. A little bit about sort of my background and why I am so joyous to be working on this project. Powerloop is largely that I did a master's in public policy and largely did my dissertation all focused around the infrastructure issues we face. And my conclusion around domestic charging and solutions and what possibly could help with our grid networks basically revolved around vehicle to grid. And hence, sort of 3 years later, I'm now working on a project which is looking at vehicle to grid and actually rolling it out. So this is something which I see super exciting, is that this is a project that is in constant evolution. And I think that is something we will touch on in the questions which have been asked, as there are some future sort of prospective kind of questions, which we'll definitely touch on. But it's something which makes this project so exciting, something we want to get as many customers on board with, is that with that evolution, you can evolve with it and also dictate the path which vehicle to grid will be taking in the UK. So super excited to be discussing some of the great questions we've had coming through. And I hope you enjoy the next sort of hour or so learning all about Powerloop.
I think it's really important for me to echo what Tom has just said there, especially as a reformed petrol head. I very much feel that the idea to make sure that that we get the car right and we get the solution right for you. Now, George is going to speak probably a lot at length today when we ask him to tell us what vehicle to grid is about Powerloop not being a car. And I totally get on board with that. But what we do need to do is make sure that the solution fits for you. That's what Octopus has always been about. No matter what business they have looked to invest in or get involved in, whether that be SwiftKey, Zoopla, Love Film, or other ones that are just cropping up now, people like Kazoo and other things as well. I think it's really important that we understand that it's there to be a solution and it's there to challenge the status quo. And that's kind of what Powerloop really embodies. But the worst thing we could do is get you in a car that doesn't suit you and then expect you to go and tell everybody about how amazing it is. So in that respect, if there are any questions that aren't answered tonight, or there are any questions that you go, do you know what, I'd like to ask that personally, we'll be more than happy to answer those at a later date. We'll follow this up for everybody that's watched live and submitted their details with an email that will hook you up to what's next. How do I go and learn more? What can I go and understand? Just so that when you come to speak to George or Tom, you understand the process and you understand what you could be getting yourself in for. Now, that sounds like it's a bad thing. I don't mean that. I just mean that you understand what's going on around Powerloop and when you need to charge it. Whereas with a normal EV, you plug it in whenever you want. And George is going to cover that a little bit now. George, can you give us an idea of what vehicle to grid is? Because I think a lot of the time we hear it, we see it on social media, we know that it gets quite a big sort of traction or following on social media, or lots of people think it's really cool. But actually the number of people that are legitimately involved in it is quite low, right? And that's because it's quite new technology. Can you talk us through, well, it's not, technology is not new, but the use case in Europe or in the UK is fairly new, right? Could you talk us through like what it is, how it works, and why it's so important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of what vehicle to grid is, I guess looking at the electric vehicle that I can see parked up outside now, stationary. There's a large battery there of unused electricity that we could be taking from it. And in the case of our homes, powering our homes, and then helping stabilize the grid. One of the big issues that this looks into is something called peak loading. Now, energy demand, there's a large spike from around 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. What Powerloop is looking to do, on what vehicle to grid can help with, is helping balance out that spike in energy demand. So 4 p.m. people come home from work, or they usually would do, pop on the kettle, start watching TV, go about their daily business. That causes a lot of stress on the grid. And in the coming years, this stress is only going to increase with the uptake of electric vehicles, also with the decarbonisation of heat as well, and the electrification of heat in turn. And what Powerloop looks to do, and vehicle to grid itself, is helping balance out that peak. Not only through...
George, that we should be having this webinar or this YouTube video about an hour later, just so we don't impact the peak. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, with lockdown, things have changed quite a lot, but with regular times at 7:45, then maybe there's a football game. Who knows? But that's exactly what we're looking to do. So, for example, with the football game that starts at, say, 7:45, being able to not only change the way that people use their energy, i.e., utilizing your washing machine overnight, what vehicle to grid does is able to actually push energy back to the grid. So you're going both ways. Now, what vehicle to grid in essence is taking energy from your vehicle, passing it through an electric vehicle charger, which is bidirectional, so going both ways, putting that into the home first, so satisfying the house load of electricity, and then any excess going back into the grid. So it's very simple in concept, but very complex in the actual protocol itself, which is where Powerloop comes in, and the tech team that we have behind us. Tom, is there anything that you want to add to that? Be good to have this as more of a conversational vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this sort of might go into touching on a question which is asked about how does your future solution compare with Tesla options? It's something which, when we look at batteries and we look at all the batteries which are out there, such as the Tesla option of a Powerwall, it's we love them. We love the batteries which are out there. And we think when it comes to renewables and renewables solving our reliance on dirty energy, we look at batteries as something which comes in hand as going back to what George was discussing about this peak period in demand. The big issue of trying to rely on renewables is that renewables are intermittent and they might not be or might not have the supply at that given time. And so this is when batteries really come into their own, as they can store when there's an oversupply from the renewables and then release when we need them. And of course, there is the Tesla Powerwall, and there are other different kinds of batteries out there on the market. But the problem is that they are just wholly expensive. And I can say for myself, I wouldn't be able to go out and buy a Tesla Powerwall or a domestic battery and pop it in my property. However, as you say, George, the cars are outside, they are sitting there idle, and this means there's a car battery in there which can be used. And this is one of the really awesome things about this, because it's making home batteries as an affordable option for clientele. So if you've got a driveway and you're looking to get an EV, it's this dual function which you're looking at. And something to just reiterate, which gets lost with the phrasing of vehicle to grid, is that the way which the system works is it really should be called vehicle to home to grid. As you know, your property is going to be prioritized through that vehicle. And any excess actually which gets sent back onto the grid will most likely be powering up your neighbors' houses. So you'll actually be helping the community of energy and maybe supplying a cup of tea in those sort of evening periods. So yeah, the whole system is really, really cool in the sense of a new way to look at domestic batteries and a new way to look at e-mobility. And combining the both, that's what makes Powerloop such a special project, as it's sort of transforming the way we look at storing and using energy at our homes.
Excellent. Yeah, and just to add to that, what Powerloop is looking to do is to really search for the business case for vehicle to grid. There are quite a few other projects out there at the moment on V2G, which are trying to do the same thing. What Powerloop is set up to do is to give people the tools to be able to play with this new kind of technology in a risk-free way. We'll be able to gather the data from that. And then after the first 12 months, Charlie, go for it.
Had a question about that, about, has it been working in Japan? Has CHAdeMO been working in Japan doing vehicle to grid? And I think it's interesting that we're pointing out this business case for vehicle to grid, because in Japan, it's much more of a relief system. It's there because of Fukushima and because Nissan and the Japanese government realized that they could use their cars to give energy back to homes in a disaster. And in the UK, we don't seem to have, not that we don't have earthquakes or tsunamis regularly. We maybe did years and years and years ago, but we don't regularly. And I think that's really important to point out, that hopefully it should never work in Japan. Like, hopefully vehicle to grid should never work in Japan, because that means something major has gone wrong. Whereas in the UK, we are using it. We've got people on the trial right now who are actually powering their homes right about now with energy from their Nissan LEAF, which is really, really cool. I suppose we get so many questions about Powerloop, but maybe we should break it down a little bit. We work with the Nissan LEAF quite obviously, and we talk a lot about the Nissan LEAF. Now, as the person I am, and as part of Octopus Electric Vehicles, I'm fairly non-biased. I mean, I used to work at Tesla, so that makes me a little bit biased, but I'm normally very unbiased when it comes to an EV, and it's all about working at what's right. But for Powerloop, it's specifically the Nissan LEAF. Can you explain a little bit more about why that is, and give people that are on the call who are maybe not as up to speed as lots of other people about why particularly it's the Nissan LEAF and not something else?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to start off, we don't have favoritism with Nissan, as Charlie was highlighting, but it's largely, I think it's two factors here. You've got to understand of what allows a car to actually be able to use vehicle to grid. There's got to be a charging system on one side to actually have that bi-directional flow and ability to send power into the car and take power out. But also the car itself has to have the capability to do this as well. Now, we know Nissan they're a Japanese based company, and the actual vehicle to grid system, it originated in Japan through what Charlie was discussing about the Fukushima disaster and it being a disaster relief system. So they created the vehicle-to-grid system. They ensured that all of their vehicles would have the vehicle-to-grid capability in the car. So great, that meant Nissan LEAFs, as they came through as electric vehicles, had that capability embedded in the vehicle. Now we look on the other side and we look at what charging system is favored in Japan, and that is the CHAdeMO. If you're not too certain on what a CHAdeMO charging system is, there are different types of charging systems for electric vehicles. The Europeans favor CCS system, Japanese favor CHAdeMO system. Now, as the CHAdeMO system is favored in Japan, lo and behold, the system which actually could carry the vehicle to grid functionality was the CHAdeMO charging system. Now, as I just mentioned, the European standards, they favor CCS, which means a lot of the vehicles, well, pretty much all now vehicles we actually see on the road, they have a CCS charging connector. Good way to look at it is try and plug your Apple charger into your Samsung phone. It just won't work. And that's the same thing with CCS and CHAdeMO. So now what we've got is the Nissan LEAF as a vehicle with the vehicle to grid capability that has a CHAdeMO connector and uses a CHAdeMO charging system for vehicle to grid. Now, what we see on the market recently is cars like the Honda E, which yes, comes from or stems from sort of Japanese manufacturers, but was made for a European market, so uses a CCS connector. So yes, the Honda E has the capability to do vehicle to grid, there just isn't the charging system, so there isn't the CCS charging system to actually carry out that functionality. So it's twofold really reasons why we use the Nissan LEAF and why we can only use the Nissan LEAF at the moment. It's because the car has the capability and the charging system CHAdeMO is capable and is the system we use. Now, I think I'll move on to George or Charlie about the questions around CHAdeMO and CCS.
We know that lots of cars are coming, right, Tom? I mean, you and George, I absolutely love the Nissan Ariya. The Lucid Air looks incredible, and the fact you'll not only just be able to do V to H to G, you'll be able to do V to V, which is like so cool. You'll be able to do like vehicle to vehicle, which is really, really cool. But I think that it's really important to point out that the legislation isn't there, and as you were saying, the charging manufacturers aren't quite there at building the right chargers for that yet. And I think the data from this trial will help them understand that. So if you do want Tesla to move fast, if you do want Honda to move, or not Honda to move fast, but people that could supply Honda with a CCS charger, Powerloop is the quickest way to have an effect on that. Now, that doesn't affect everybody, right, George? That doesn't help everybody because this is a trial. This is a government trial that's run in the southeast of England, but it's not because it's in the southeast of England. I hope everybody can tell from my accent that I'm not going to be championing the southeast of England to always have these trials, which sometimes it seems like. But there's a particular reason that it is in the southeast. Do you want to touch on that and why that's the case?
Is that a question to me? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's in the southeast due to the DNO, which is the company that in essence owns and maintains the cables in your area. The DNO in the southeast is called UK Power Networks, UKPN. We're partnering very closely with them on this trial. We've chosen just to work with one DNO and not all the DNOs in the entire country, which is a decision that has proved time and time again to be the best one, as we're able to work closely with them to solve complex issues about getting customers up and running on the trial. An example of this is something called the G99, which is in essence a engineering recommendation which gives visibility and allows for safety so that the engineers for UK Power Networks are protected, but also the visibility so we can really see what all these generating assets, in this case the vehicle to grid chargers, really getting up to and whether the grid can actually sustain that. So UKPN, all the customers that we have coming onto the trial go through their experience with the G99, which is handled totally through Octopus and our project manager, Albena, who's been working to optimize that onboarding process. You know, at the moment, we're only looking to get 135 people onto the trial. But things like getting a speedy G99 sorted, those kind of operations can be scaled across not only vehicle to grid chargers, but other kind of solar installations, etc., etc. So the work that we do with UK Power Networks is not only going to be used in this DNO in the future. A lot of the things that we can learn will be rolled out elsewhere as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of Ollie, man. Every time I look down, I see more questions coming in from Ollie. So thank you so much for all the questions that are coming in. And I think a lot of them do pertain to people who aren't in that area wanting the availability to get Powerloop or get vehicle to grid, or people that can't have a 40 kilowatt Nissan LEAF wanting to get on Powerloop. And I think that's where the things like the Tesla questions come from, the other cars, the future cars come in from. And then we don't want to hold all the cards, right? We don't want to hold all the cards and cards, not cars. We don't want to hold those cards and not see how we're playing. And I think that's really important. We've seen questions come in about like how many people are on the trial. So we're targeting 135 to get on the trial, and that will be more than enough to get us what we need to do. And right now we're sitting, I mean, it depends if you watch this after the live stream or not, but if you're watching this live, we're sitting sort of 90 or so people. Now there's a small drop off rate because of that G99 process, but we're sitting sort of 90 people, maybe a little bit more. So we're more than 75% of the way through getting everybody signed up. And I think it's really important that that days like today are to let everybody know about it, because we would love to be able to say, yeah, come all, sign up. Let's get to that 135 by the end of next week. But it doesn't quite work like that, and it doesn't quite help us do that. We're also seeing a lot of questions about the 62 kilowatt hour LEAF. We will come on to that. We will talk about that at the end. You're spoiling the rabbit reveal in the magician's hat. It's our big bit at the end. So just so you know about that before we get on, we will be covering that for you. We've discussed about UKPN. We've discussed about the car. I think for me, what's really important is that we try and be as thorough as possible with this, so that in the future we can offer so much more for so many more people. And I think it's really important for me that we nail this. Like, if we don't get this right, how do we make sure that when we're talking to Scottish Government or the Welsh Assembly or to TFGM or to as Transport for Greater Manchester or to Birmingham City Council, how are we making sure that they understand? We've had people from different parts of the world come and speak to us about Powerloop and be like, can we do it at Manchester Airport? Can I suggest that you help us work on some vehicle to grid at Manchester Airport? And we'd love to do it. And it hurts us almost as much to see people asking from outside UKPN or people that can't have a Nissan LEAF, as much as it hurts those people. But we have to turn them down, because if we don't get it right with UKPN, we won't get it right with SSE or with SPNG or with any of the other DNOs or Western Power, who have their own vehicle to grid trial. But I think it's really important to understand from George that we're only working with one to perfect the process. And once it's perfected, hold on to your hats. We will be coming somewhere near you. That does mean that we're probably a year or two out before we can actually showcase that data. But once we can showcase that data, be ready. Not something called Powerloop, I doubt, but something like Powerloop will be coming to a town near you. But we need to get all this data right. We need to convince Boris Johnson. We need to convince Parliament. We need to convince Bayes and Olev and all the other people that are involved here, especially Wallbox, to continue chasing that CCS vehicle to grid dream. Now, I see some questions coming in from Ollie. I think right now is probably a brilliant chance to talk about something that's not in my wheelhouse, and that's much more around solar, right? Because I think lots of people come towards us for Powerloop and they get really excited, and then they see that it's a bit of a trial and some of it's fairly restrictive. And we're not going to pull the wool over your eyes. Like, there is some restrictiveness in the trial, but that's to give you the safety and the security that we think. Look at agile prices recently. There could be a huge problem there if we didn't look after you the right way. So we're going to come on and speak about tariff, but something that we do get quite a lot, George and Tom, is solar. We get asked a lot about solar. Now, there is a big question that we had from a certain someone regarding certain amount of solar and another amount of solar, and can I use it with my batteries? And I think it pertains to a lot of people actually who join this call or join these videos already are thinking about how they affect the environment. And therefore, they're already thinking about solar panels, or maybe they already have some. And it would be cool just to outline like the do's and don'ts, or what we can and can't do with solar, just so that people have an idea of that. If there are, at the end of this, if there are any particular questions you do, don't be shy. Reach out to George and Tom. They don't bite, and they will be able to get in touch with you and give you some specifics around your own sort of solar setup. But is there anything you can let us know about whether we love solar, hate solar, whether you can join, can't join, with batteries or without batteries on solar, or maybe a little bit of maybe the pitfalls or the easy wins? Like if you have solar, is there an easy win as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for people who have solar, a lot of our customers already have solar. So it's definitely something that we welcome. And people who are already making that step to become more sustainable in their domestic setup is absolutely where we want to be. Powerloop is not testing solar along with vehicle to grid. It's something that would be kind of separate to that. What you can think of, I think, feed-in tariff is something that we can start on. People who have got in early and got those preferable feed-in tariffs, not to worry, that's something you'll be able to keep. Our project manager has fought tooth and nail for that to be the case. One thing that is a big non-starter for some people who want to divert solar energy directly into their electric vehicle battery, that's not something we can do intelligently on Powerloop today. If the vehicle is charging and there is excess solar not taken up by the house load, then it will go into the electric vehicle battery, but we can't intelligently divert it. It's something that we'll be looking at further on down the line for sure, but Powerloop as it is today, and as Charlie mentioned, with the area being UK Power Networks, the car just being the Nissan LEAF, simplicity is something that features throughout the trial, and there's the same with solar itself. With people who have specific solar setups, something that's super important is that a lot of this is on a case-by-case basis. So if you do have a solar array that's larger than, say, sort of 8 to 10 kilowatts, then you might have difficulty getting that G99 approval to export back to the grid, and there might be a limit on that. It's not something that is a non-starter. It is something that we are actually working through with a couple of our customers. Again, the only reason why we're able to do this is because we're working directly with UK Power Networks and not other DNOs as well. It gives us the time to do so. Solar in general, though, it's definitely where all this is headed. Vehicle to grid is sort of one of the toughest nuts to crack in home energy management. And once we've got this sorted, things like connecting up different devices is definitely something that makes our project manager incredibly passionate about where Powerloop can go in the future. Tom, would you have anything to add on solar itself?
Yeah, I think you covered all the points really well there. I think I just want to ring true that we do love solar, and there is no specific user case correct for Powerloop. And this sort of goes back to what Charlie was saying about we need user cases to be able to spread it across the UK, and goes to what George is saying about this isn't a trial on how power a vehicle to grid can link with solar. This is a trial to first showcase that the technology can work on all different user cases. So be it you might have an air source heat pump, be it you might have solar, be it you have whatever setup, we will be able to go through with you individually and discuss that specific setup. And there is most of the time a solution which we can find to make sure it does work. But I think there are some just key points to note with solar, which links to the export limit on your household. If you do already have solar there or any source of generation there, you might not be able to install a new source of generation. But that changes from property to property. And it's also the idea that the linkage, which, as George was saying, a direct diversion of putting solar into the car battery We're not quite there yet, but that is, again, what Powerloop is looking to push forward and drive forward, that this tech does work, and then we can make those necessary steps to have vehicle to grid to turn into more of that battery for your solar as well. So 100%, it's not a limiting factor if you've got solar, or if you're looking to get solar in the future. It's something which, please jump on the call and we can go through your user case by user case and what maybe your kilowatts are for the panels and the roof and how that will link with the setup exactly.
And we've had a couple of questions. I know Charlie mentioned at the beginning, Tom and I can't see the questions, but I think we have had a couple of questions that are on specific setups, and we do have your details, or we should do if you plugged in your email. So we'll be able to get in touch after the call if you want to go through any specific cases.
Yeah, amazing. I think there's a really interesting question that's come in that sort of ties into that, which I find really interesting. And actually, I think there's a lot of answers to it. There's a lot of spinning of plates here. And thank you to the person that's asked this, because I think this shows a real understanding of what we're trying to do. And the question is, if we synchronize the charging with low price signals, which we don't do on Powerloop, but vehicle to grid would be looking to do, right? When we scale up, doesn't that overload the grid and remove the low price benefit? Now, I think I have an answer, but I don't know if it's absolutely right, because I am a battery and wheels guy. So I don't know, George, Tom, do you want to field it? And if you're struggling, I might step in with what I think my answer is. Or actually, shall I say my answer? And if I'm wrong, you can tell me. And if I'm right, you can extrapolate as to why I'm right, whereas actually I just sort of think I know. Does that make sense? So from my understanding is that if we do this and we do sync it with low prices, what we'll see is more and more renewables come online, and renewables are just getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So therefore, if we do have an excess of wind somewhere, we're still going to see low prices, even if everybody is charging at that time. If there's excess of wind, we'll see those lower prices. Now, the other thing is, I think that a lot of people that sit on Agile, on Octopus Agile, see this as an amazing opportunity to make some money. And we think that in the future, you probably will be able to. But right now, this trial is to showcase that the person that doesn't hoard energy, and I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean that in a really good way, the person that doesn't hoard energy or doesn't really think about their energy can still have a positive impact on the national grid and on our energy makeup, for want of a better phrase. Now, to come back to that question, yes, if we all charge at the same time, we will see a spike, but we'll be lowering the cost of energy in that peak period. So therefore, if you are on Agile, it will become flatter. And if you're not on Agile, you'll just be using energy when it's greener. Is that fair enough, or what do you think to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's also a part of this question which, it's a great question, by the way, and I love these questions when also is discussing including air source heat pumps. What impact does that have on the sort of grid management, and when should you use them? It's a really fascinating area. But there's a part of Powerloop which is looking to solve that issue in the future. Once vehicle to grid becomes you can use it on demand. So when you can release energy from your car at any time in the day, instead of having sort of specific discharge cycles and specific recharge cycles, as then the synchronization of charging at low price signals actually changes completely as you're discharging and recharging throughout the day and across the UK. So naturally, there'll be a trickle effect of actually households using vehicle to grid to power their homes through the battery storage systems. And then also those battery storage systems will actually charge other vehicles. So the way which the grid network will operate will become a lot more, as George said from the beginning, decentralized. And actually, as Charlie said, that flatter curve of demand will just be natural. So the question is fantastic, because if you try to do a dump on these specific parameters, yes, we could start to see issues. But the fact of Powerloop, what it's looking to showcase is the technology amongst these parameters. And then after the 2 or 3 years, there will be huge amount of freedom about when those discharging and charging cycles can be used. And so through that that should actually solve the problem of, will everyone just charge during the low price signals, or when will they discharge? There will actually be a fluctuation of when people are discharging and when people are charging. And with that will become this balancing act. So it's a really, really interesting question. And I think it's something which Powerloop is actually looking to solve in the future. But at the moment, with what the parameters are, just to showcase the technology, it does look like, hold on, if we will just discharge then and charge then, will that not sort of be counterproductive? But in the future, 100% not, as we'll be able to suddenly say, can I just discharge my car at a random point of the day?
I think another thing that's just come to me, and I'm going to pass to George, because George's favourite word is the democratization of energy, or power to the people. But if you look at Australia as an example, it is Australia Day. I have an Australian housemate who's partying at the moment. Parts of Australia have different pricing of electricity dependent on where you are in Australia at that moment. Now, I can totally get if you're thinking about the difference between Perth and Adelaide, which is a long, long way away. But some cities that are much closer have different pricing because of differences in solar, or differences. Their peak is actually in the middle of the day when they're using air conditioning. So I could see that, like, you could imagine Kent exporting energy to maybe like Sussex, or, you know, Northumbria exporting energy to the Scottish borders, the East borders, or somewhere like Aberdeenshire or Perthshire exporting energy to Stirlingshire. And I think that starts to get me quite excited, because maybe those pricing systems won't be the way that we think of them now as across the board. And we see that with the other bit of news. We'll cover up the Octopus electric vehicles logo and talk about Octopus Energy in their big fan idea. So I don't know if you've followed the news lately, but Octopus Energy has bought 2 giant wind turbines. And if you're in a certain postcode around that wind turbine, you get cheaper energy whenever that wind turbine is spinning. And at a certain speed, you get 50% off as well. And imagine we could do that with cars. Imagine you could store that energy when that wind turbine outside your house was spinning. I think you can see all the chess pieces moving, and they're slowly forming up to see how we give fossil fuels checkmate. But if you take in each individual piece, you could see, well, a rook can't go in straight lines, so that's rubbish. Or, you know, the queen can't jump over other pieces. But I think once they all work together, you start to really see how this larger ecosystem could make a big difference in that world. George, you're the democratization or the power to the people expert. So Tom and I covered off everything, or can you wade in a little bit more?
I thought that was absolutely perfect. Yeah, really good answers from both of you. I think with power supply, historically it's been linear, and with all this distributed generation, that's really decentralizing it. And what Powerloop is looking to do is enable that energy network of the future, for want of a better buzz phrase. But that's truly what we're doing, and what we're trying to set out to do is to be able to utilize those generating assets on people's driveways, as opposed to relying on a central grid system. And further to what Tom was saying, you know, it's 135 people. The spike in demand that would make is negligible, but this is laying the groundwork for understanding how these assets will be able to relate to each other, how these people might, you know, even down to how they relate to the application that this vehicle to grid is done on, or Powerloop is done on, and how we can scale that up to the rest of the country as well. All this is super important to see how quickly this technology will be taken up across CCS vehicles on, you know, different areas of the UK, different countries, for example, Australia, etc., etc. So all these different explorations into distributed generation is really going to help us meet those net zero targets through making our grid as smart as possible.
I think you've just given us the wisest words we could hear. But there's a couple of questions that are coming in about the unit itself, so about the Wallbox vehicle to grid unit. If you join our workshop, we can speak to you so much more about how cool that is. But there's a couple of questions about discharging times. There's a couple of questions about like when is peak, like at 4 p.m., but you're talking about 6 p.m. And there's some other stuff about the fan being fairly noisy or not being fairly noisy. But I'm wondering, if there's anything we can have can you sum that up nice and quickly? I know there's a lot of bits there, but they all seem to pertain to that Wallbox unit, which is actually a really clever piece of kit developed by ex-engineers from leading motorsport, car, and sort of tech companies. But how do we best sum that up? George, I don't know if you want to sum that up for us as to what that unit, how it works,
and how it works in the parameters of Powerloop. Yeah, absolutely. So simplicity is key. We'll start off with that phrase. Plugging in before 6 p.m., keeping plugged in until 5 a.m. the next day. That counts as one vehicle to grid cycle. Complete 12 of those in one calendar month, and you get £30 as cashback, as credit into your Octopus Energy account at the end of the month. Octopus will optimize the discharge. All you need to do is set at what level you want the recharge to be the next day. As simple as that. In terms of the actual discharge itself, as we mentioned earlier, what we're looking at is the 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. time. So if the car is plugged in before 4 p.m. and is set to start one of those vehicle to grid cycles, it will be discharging from 4 to 7. After 7, all the way through to 5 a.m. the next day, it will be recharging to whatever level you set it at. So super simple as it is. You can't discharge outside of that period. That's not what we're looking at currently. Although the trial itself is 2 to 3 years long, it runs the length of the car lease personal contract hire agreement. So within that, we're hoping to see some kind of development. But Powerloop is as it is today, which is plugging in before 6, keeping plugged in until 5 a.m. the next day, and then the discharge will be from 4 to 7. Tom, would you like to add anything to the simplicity of that?
I think that sort of answers some of the questions which were asked, sort of inquiring why we start it at 6.
Very briefly, could we put some AMs and PMs on that number? Just because what we heard was 6 till 7, but 5 till 4 till 7.
Absolutely.
I just want to double check that people know that we're not going to discharge them in the middle of the night and they're going to wake up at 6:30 going to, I don't know, a round of golf or going surfing or something, and then it turns out their car's got 30% and they can't go. George has done an amazing job, but I just want to make sure that we're not worried about those AMs, PMs, and what's all going on there. Sorry, George, I didn't mean to make you to cut in, but I just wanted people to know what that was.
Absolutely. So I think, this answers sort of the question of the ideas of why are we looking to start the cycle at 6 p.m. When the peak demand is at 4 p.m. So as George has said, is that the discharge cycle is from 4 p.m. till 7 p.m. That's represents the peak also period of demand on our grid. So that's why we've designated the parameter of the discharging cycle being for that period. So a vehicle to grid cycle, however, for Octopus looks at plugging in any time before 6 p.m. So the questions of why are you looking at 6 p.m? You actually can plug in any time before. That's fantastic. You can actually make the most out of the vehicle during the discharging cycle as well. So happy days there. The reason we've got that 6 p.m. Sort of starter point there is just to make sure that at least for I think we had a question come through about what about the customers who are commuting from work and finish at 5. And I mean, for me, and it doesn't take me an hour to move from my bedroom office into my living room, but absolutely such a viable question when things open up and we're actually commuting back from work. That's one of the reasons why we stay plugging in any time before 6 p.m, just to give a bit of cushion as well for anyone who does have to commute to get home. But the actual discharging cycle is from 4 till 7. And as George said, you just got to keep the car plugged in anytime from 6 p.m. and keep it plugged in until 5 a.m. the next day, and that constitutes a vehicle to grid cycle. And it's one of the super exciting things as well about that personal contract hire side of things, is that this project as a whole. And we get some questions of what happens to the charger at the end, or what happens to the car at the end, or what happens to my vehicle to grid system at the end of this project. The awesome thing is that, as George said, 2 or 3 years of the personal contract hire, the car does come back to Octopus, but the charger, full ownership, goes to you. And so you get to use a vehicle to grid system in any way you like. And this includes, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have new cars on the market which can be compatible with vehicles to grid. And there should be, as Charlie was saying, maybe not under the realm of Powerloop, but some sort of vehicle to grid system through Octopus, which you can hop onto and make the most out of it there as well. And that's hopefully when we'll see vehicle to grid on demand, when you can start to really make the most of that system. But that's one of the exciting future-proofing mechanisms of Powerloop as well.
Exactly. I think just to add to that with the cycle itself, so that means plugging in before 6 p.m. and keeping plugged in. So if you are, let's say, wanting to go for an emergency glass of milk, which is quite unlikely these days, but after 6 p.m. and want to break that vehicle to grid cycle, you absolutely can. At the moment on the app, which is in its beta testing phase, there's a boost button which would break the vehicle to grid cycle, and you can unplug it. You're not locked in, but it wouldn't count towards one of those 12 cycles. So you would have to have another cycle to get to that 12 cycles to get your £30 cash back. That's important to note. I think with the, Tom was just speaking on lockdown and people's driving habits. Powerloop initially, when it was thought up, was designed for people who drive cars, which makes sense. And when they get home, and this is also further to what Tom was saying about why it starts at 6 p.m. is to allow people to get home from work. So what we devised was these timescales so that people would arrive home from work, start their discharge, and then recharge up. So 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. is quite a short window. You're not going to be discharging that much. However, with lockdown, what we saw is that people were, the state of charge of their battery, because they weren't using it, tended to be much higher. And they started the cycle a bit earlier, and so we're discharging more. And then suddenly, because they were having to pay for the recharge of the vehicle to cover where they started the vehicle to grid cycle, the £30 cashback suddenly didn't become an incentive to do vehicle to grid charging, which goes against what the project's actually set out to do. It becomes something that just covers the cost of recharge. So what we have on Powerloop today is something called the reconciliation, whereby you don't pay to recharge your vehicle to the state of charge where you started that vehicle to grid cycle. So for example, if you started the vehicle to grid cycle at say 65% and discharged to 30%, you'll never be below 30% for the discharge. You won't pay to recharge that vehicle back up to where you started. That'll be reconciled and paid to you and feature as credit at the end of the month on the Octopus energy bill. Does that, guys, does that all make sense? I think the reconciliation is a bit confusing.
I like to think of it as, or I just to repeat, it's like whatever you return home with and whatever you use in that period of 4 till 7 p.m, Octopus will put back into the battery for free, but then the rest of it, or not really for free because you've already paid for it, essentially in the first bit, but you're doing your bit for the grid, right? So you're helping the grid out at that point. So we're going to cover that power back up to charge you back up to the point that you return. So if you returned at 72, discharged to 30, we would cover the 42% back up to 72, but then that 28% from 72 to 100, you'd expect it to pay. But that's like paying for your fuel. Much cheaper than fuel, might I add, but it's like paying for fuel. Now, I think there's a really good question here or it's a really nice thing to point out, that we maybe got that question about, can people like I'm commuting and I'm leaving work at 5, and let's say that person doesn't get home till 6:30 every single day, maybe it's an hour and a half commute. And I think that ties into the new 62 kilowatt hour LEAF, because lots of people are asking, like, does it change the way that the trial works? Does it mean I can do other things? Does it mean I can go further afield? And for me, actually, sometimes having that 62 kilowatt hour Leaf is a blessing and a curse, because it's brand new. We're not 100% the best way to utilize it on Powerloop yet. So it will be following the exact same regime as the 40 kilowatt. But actually, it's really about fitting that car into your life. And if the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf doesn't fit into your life for whatever reason, is the 62 kilowatt hour, or are you trying to shoehorn a different solution in? And in that sense, I think it's really important that we touch on things like the charging regime, like how many miles you do, and therefore the costs associated with that. Now, we're not going to, don't worry, anybody who has spoken to us, we're not going to expose you live on YouTube and tell you how much you'll be paying for your 62 kilowatt hour Leaf. But I think it's really important to understand that at certain points, even if the cost of the car is right, that the energy could be prohibitive. If you're going above 20,000 miles, for example, you're not going to be worthwhile on Powerloop. You'll be worthwhile on something else. And I just want to maybe touch around that car, touch around those specifics, and see if there's anything in there that you guys can really help the people that are watching understand. Because I think it's really hard. I think it's really cliche for us to say, oh, we don't want to sell you a car. We want to get you the right solution. And I think any major dealership right now would try and tell you that, and then sell you the most expensive Toyota Supra they could, even when it's Tom's mum that's come in and she doesn't even know what a Toyota Supra is. But I think for us, it's really important to explain those gives and takes around that, those pros and cons around that 62 kilowatt hour Leaf. George, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in terms of vehicle choice, I do love to say that Powerloop is an energy proposition, but the vehicle itself has to fit into your life, not the other way around. And also with high mileage or high range vehicles, I think a lot of people who get onto Powerloop, this is their first foray into electric vehicles. And as a result, there are a lot of people who they're fearful of having range anxiety. And you are paying for more for the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf, or would be, but are you actually going to be using it to go those extra distances? And how often are you going to be using those extra distances? Because the 40 kilowatt hour Leaf, I've got the end connector sitting on my driveway, not my own driveway, but the public driveway, and that does suit with what I want to do. If I want to go up to Scotland, or wanted to go visit Charlie in Glasgow, for example, that would not be something that I want to do incredibly regularly. But if I was doing that with the 62 kilowatt hour Leaf, then those kind of mileages on Powerloop, which is the fixed rate energy tariff, I'd have to look at how much I'd be using for my energy, because that might be rocketing up those energy costs. So Octopus Go in that case might be something that would be more suited. So as Charlie mentioned, someone who's doing sort of 20,000 miles or more, we'd have a longer discussion as to what that actually looks like and what the energy consumption in the home looks like as well.
And I think with that is sometimes it can actually be more cost effective if you're doing one or two big longer trips during the year to rent a car. If you're really in love with Powerloop, and actually the Nissan LEAF 40 kilowatt does actually cater for most of your needs daily. I mean, renting a car for the weekends to do that longer trip, which you might be doing, could be a better option than forking out the extra money for the 62. If it's something which just is settling your nerves for that one trip. So as George said, though, it's
go and rent a Taycan or a Model S.
Yeah.
See what you can have in the future on Powerloop, eh?
Exactly. But I mean, I think there's also talking about renting cars and owning cars and what cars can we use with Powerloop. And I know we sort of discussed that. It's really a user case basis, and can talk you through with what your sort of usage of your vehicle is to make sure it is the right option for you. But can you use your own car with Powerloop? And this is a question which comes up quite a lot when we're discussing sort of vehicles and discussing leasing out the 40 kilowatts, or now the 62 kilowatts. But The simple answer is no, you can't bring your own car. You can't use your own car. You do have to lease a vehicle through Octopus Electric Vehicles. This is largely due to, well, predominantly due to the warranty cover we do have on the vehicles that we can lease out. Now, touch wood, and we haven't had any problems so far. We don't expect to have any problems, but what this extended warranty covers is the battery itself, which is in the car. So if a problem did arise, or a situation which was caused by vehicle to grid, we know our vehicles are covered. We know we can get it sorted, and we know our customers are protected relating to that. And that's why we don't let really customers bring their own vehicles into the picture. However, again, and this sort of brings on to, I think there was a question about, is the Wallbox property of your own at the end of the trial? So for the duration, just to make this super crystal clear, is that for the duration of the project, yes, the charger is property of Octopus, and that is only because we have some super clever customers who know all about the wiring of the charger, and they like to have a play with the wires. So that is why we just ensure that the ownership for the trial period is ownership of Octopus. But as I say, at the end of the trial, you then get full ownership of the charger. And that's when you can start to look at other vehicles and what other vehicles in the market. And fingers crossed, we have a CCS system out there, or some sort of system of retrofitting or adapters. I know we've had some questions about, will I be able to make a transition to CCS with the Wallbox charger? The simple answer is, at the moment, we're not too sure. But what we do know is that Wallbox as a company, they were working on a CCS Wallbox charger to be used with vehicle to grid. However, this got postponed due to the dreaded C word, and they actually started to work on ventilators and hospital equipment. So that have been delays to the CCS release. But what it does mean is that it is coming, and it will be coming soon. And fingers crossed, at the end of the 2 or 3 year lease that you actually take out with Octopus, the CCS charger will be out. And that might mean that there's some sort of adaptation or retrofitting system which can come in play with that, so you can change up the charger which you have. I mean, George, do you have anything to add on that sort of CCS CHAdeMO or future after Powerloop? Or
yeah, I think just actually on the battery, I've written down battery health and degradation. Degradation of the battery. So yeah, the reason why it's a newly leased, one of the other reasons why it's a newly leased Nissan LEAF, is one of the things we were looking at into is the effect of vehicle to grid cycling on the health of the battery of the vehicle itself. The battery of EVs is one of the most expensive parts of it. It's one of the reasons why they're so expensive. And if we can prove in, or help to prove in real world conditions, that vehicle to grid cycling of the electric vehicle battery can actually help improve that battery life, what that will do is help drive down costs of electrical vehicle ownership, and more likely electric vehicle leasing for everyone. You know, if you can say that you take out a lease of a Nissan LEAF and have a vehicle to grid charger, so the value of this Nissan LEAF at the end of my lease will be higher than others, then that's going to do huge things for the rollout of electric vehicles across the UK. So that's something that we're very excited about.
And that kind of links on how we've got where we're at with the 62. I know we sort of briefly touched on it, and if customers are looking to get quotes on that, or if you are current customers and looking to see what the prices are there with that, the awesome thing about this is that we were trialing testing the 62, and now we've got the green light, and that's what's led us to get the figures and the quotations actually available for that vehicle. So if you are looking to look into the 62, as I know we've had a variety of questions come through, and I know we might not have fully covered in depth, we can reach out to you, or just get in touch with us, and we can discuss the quotations for the 62 or the 40 and discuss your user case.
Well, Tom, I think that's a very good place to sort of end this. We're coming to the end of our hour, and for everybody that's on the call or that's on YouTube, thank you ever so much for joining and dropping messages. But this is also for people in the future to come and see what people who are maybe a little bit more knowledgeable and asking about things on their end, to see what others may ask in the future as well. And I think that's really important for us as well. So thank you to everybody who has submitted a question. If you are already a Nissan LEAF owner, please do come and speak to us. There are options out there. We will help you point in the right direction of how you could join Powerloop, just not with your Nissan LEAF. But if you have one, we may have an option for you. But the other thing that I think is really important for us to point out is that we haven't got through all the questions tonight that we really wished we could have. And George, Tom and I, we do a workshop every Wednesday, which you are more than welcome to join. I'm guessing a lot of you have already joined, but if you haven't, please do have a look at that. Have a look at our other YouTube videos where you can see the units in action. But what we will do is over the course of the next couple of days, George, Tom and I will bang our heads together virtually, not in real life, because that would be against social distancing. And we will come up with a big long email with a list of all of the questions that we had come through on the YouTube channel, and that Ollie, thankfully our secret squirrel, Ollie, in the background managed to send us through. Now, what I would ask is that if you have put in a question, but you haven't sent us your email address, drop a little email to hello@octopusev.com, and maybe in the subject, put in question for Tom and George live stream or YouTube or something like that, just so that we can see that. And then we'll fire out an email to everybody that's either come in and given us their email address, or the people that have emailed us that, to let them know the answer to almost every question. There may be some questions we won't know the answer to, but we'll still give you an answer. Whether or not it's that we don't know is another matter, but we'll definitely try and get all those questions answered as much as possible. But it is Tuesday evening. You probably have much better things to do than watch Tom, George, and I sit and talk to one another on what would be an extended work call for everything else. But to everybody that joined,